Hi everybody, welcome back to the studio. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode. Thanks for all your comments. I loved reading all your research ideas for who the artist might be. Lots of great suggestions. William Beachy, yes, definitely for style. And then again, I've been looking at I've got two potentials that I think are quite close, which I'll talk about a bit later on. I've been doing some more research on that signature and staring at more and more portraits. But anyway, today we're going to be looking at not relining, what am I talking about? We've done that. Today we are looking at retouching the rest of the portraits, so I'll be on with that. I've also been reading this book. It's not a plug, it's just a good book. I know it's backwards, but The Regency Revolution. This is by Robert Morrison, and it has been really, really interesting in just kind of filling in lots of backstory of the Regency period about the times, the people, the politics, the artists, the writers, and just that whole period. So I've been reading that these last couple of weeks, and it's been a good read. So if you want to find a little bit more about the Regency period, I would recommend it. It was very, very good. Anyway, today we are retouching, so we'll get Patrick back on the easel and we will make a start. So, okay, let's get going.
So last week we started retouching and we're just doing very, very small dots, just covering those areas where there's paint loss, where the paint's been over cleaned in the past. Anything that's dark or obtrusive to the eye. Tiny little brush strokes just to push them back. The barrier varnish is protecting this painting now, so any pigments that I add on top are easily to be wiped away if they're wrong or a little bit incorrect. So as I'm looking at the painting now, I'm mixing my colour on the palette, and then I'm using my eye to see where else that tone is on the painting and just touching those in. As you can see, the eyes are looking a little bit worse aware. They're very thickly overpainted, but I'll come to those later. So here you can see the colour of the ground coming through pale, and then the pigment that we're looking to replace is a lot more solid on top. So that's my plan with this section now, just to consolidate those areas and give the portrait its depth back, give it some more body. The pigments that I use are suspended in resin, and I use a number of different solvents depending on which resin the chips are held in for my retouching. All the retouching that's done is reversible, so it can be removed at any point in the future. And these resin chips will not age the same way that oil paints will. So some paintings that have been retouched in the past with oil paints, you'll find that the retouchings darken over time at a different rate to the painting, and then over 100 years or so, or maybe even sooner, depending on the quality of the paints, you'll be able to see quite easily where the actual restoration work has taken place. The benefits with these restoration chips is that this won't happen. They will age a lot slower than oil paint. So just in the eyes now, I'm just again little tiny dots of paint just to kind of solidify and shore up what's there. without altering the foundations of what's left behind. Unfortunately, Mr. Williamson, I think, did overclean this portrait quite badly, and that's why he overpainted it too in such a way. So my aim here is just to bring those eyes back, make them solid, keep that gaze that we've got, and build it back up a little bit without putting too much on there. Some of these retouchings are in flux, so I'll put something in and then I'll draw back and look at it again and see if it actually sits well, see if I'm happy with it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for your eyes to adjust and for you to actually assess whether what you've put in is successful or not. If it's not, it will be removed and then I'll have another go at it. Sometimes you have to retouch an area a couple of times just to make sure you're happy with it and that the portrait as a whole is sitting together. I have speeded this up quite a bit. I do like to share all the process with you as much as possible. I might do a separate video just showing the actual real-time speed of retouching in an unnarrated video. If you'd like to see this, let me know in the comments. I get a lot of comments and inquiries about how to become a restorer, and people are interested in the whole process and ask me my path into it. I will do a video about this at some point, but one of the things that I do think is really important as a restorer is the ability to paint and understand the mechanics of painting. So if this is something you are thinking about and you're studying art history or art and you're looking to get into a conservation field, I think having the ability to paint or extend your painting knowledge will put you in a real strong position. And this was the reason that led me into art restoration, was through being able to actually paint. And that's what opened lots of doors for me. And I think as well, let people be trusted that I could put back in anything that was necessary. So you can see here from viewing distance now, he's looking a lot more solid. Those flesh tones are really coming in. He's looking a lot better. Okay, that was probably, I don't know, a couple of hours retouching there. I've just been trying to really reconcile those areas where the paint's missing, or there's any of those dark areas, or where the paint has lifted a little bit and there's those peaks of the canvas, the top of the canvas. So my main aim here is just to solidify what I can see, bridge the gaps between any areas that I've lost, matching those tones in. But I'm not being heavy-handed. I'm not putting large, thick strokes of paint on there. I'm just putting small sections on there just to kind of make that image whole. So I'm going to have a look at the background shortly. But yeah, he is looking more solid. I'll have a little bit more look at those eyes. The eyes, I'm quite pleased with them. I don't want to do too much of them because it'll just change his complete appearance. But yeah, the eyes are looking a lot better than they were before. I've got a bit of a shine on his nose. He's looking a lot better. So yeah, I will continue. Okay. Before I do that though, I will just show you what I've been doing with the signature, or a bit more research on the signature. Yeah, I've been down the rabbit hole again. So let me just show you which rabbit hole I've been down this week. So if you remember last week's episode, or maybe it was the one before, we were looking at this J, S, possibly an A, and then maybe an N. and then we were thinking this next letter was a T with an extended serif, but I was wondering if it was a D. I did research a lot of 18th century artists, and one name that did come up was a John Sanders, who had a father who was a pastelist and a portrait painter. So I started inquiring online if I could find anything out about John Sanders, and the only thing I could find was this Wikipedia entry. And there's not that many paintings by him out there online that I could see. But down here it says there's a portrait of Judith at Longford Castle. And I just thought, I wonder if there's a signature on that painting there. So I had a bit of a Google around and found Longford Castle and went onto their website. Look at that. Beautiful. I phoned them up and I got in touch with a very nice lady there who put me on to somebody who was in charge of the collections. And I just inquired and asked them about this John Sanders portrait that they had, and if they had any images of it. And I told them about the project that I was working on, and I was hoping that they might be able to send something over and see if there was a signature on the portrait that they had. So after a couple of days, I got a response saying that the portrait hangs in the passage outside the library at Longford Castle, and here's the portrait of Judith. Now, it looks a lot different to the techniques of the Gent, and that was the label that they had, so there was no signature. But the collection's curator referred to him as John Lethbridge Saunders, and that's something that I hadn't heard before. So I googled Lethbridge Saunders and a George came up, and this looks very similar to the portrait that they had at Longford Castle of Judith. So a quick email back and I told them what I'd found, that maybe theirs wasn't a John Lethbridge Saunders but a George, and they seemed to think that made sense too. And because he was a miniaturist painter and Judith is holding a miniature in her hand. So unfortunately, another dead end in terms of the portraits that we've got. And I was hoping that there may be a signature similarity there, but in the end, it did just turn out to be another bit of a wild goose chase. So I'm still on with the signature. And if I get any more information, I will pass that on to you soon. So now I'm just back on with the background of this painting, which it's really nicely done actually. It's very loose, but it's quite dramatic. So again, you can see the pale areas of the ground from the canvas coming through. And again, just with very small, tiny dots, I'm just pushing that back. So no big brush strokes, just looking at those peaks of the canvas that are showing through. I'm just going to push those back now, or knock them back as we say, just so that at viewing distance they're not so apparent. Again, I'll speed this up. If you do want to see some very, very long videos of me retouching with no narration, let me know in the comments. This cloud section here still has some of Mr. Williamson's overpaint. It was just too strong and fused to the actual painting, and I didn't want to be so aggressive to take it off. So in instances like this, where there's no other option, we'll just retouch over the top of that to push it back, rather than just trying to remove it completely. And here's his cravat. If you remember from episode 4, where unfortunately I lifted a little bit of the paint with my cotton wool before it was fully relined. So I'm just using my conservation filler now. I'm going to overfill those areas of loss. And then once that's dried, we'll remove the excess. And then it'll be a matter of retouching to matching those swirls of paint and those tones that we've got there. The filler usually takes about 20 minutes for it to fully cure and go off. And then I can just use, with this one, it's just a little bit of distilled water on a cotton swab that will remove the excess. Always being careful that you don't actually remove all the filler that you've just put in. But once it sits in the actual hole, it's usually quite straightforward to remove the stuff that's just left on the surface. I think one of my favourite aspects about this restoration has been learning about the Regency period, learning about the fashions and the dress, learning about Beau Brummel and his obsession with his toilette routine and his cravats, tying. It really does sound like a really rich period in British history, with a lot of uncertainty of the throne, but again, lots of exciting things happening as well. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Things were changing a lot. But it does sound like there was massive disparity of rich and poor. But it does also sound like a really exciting time to be alive. I imagine if you had money, it was quite an exciting place to be, especially in London. From the book The Regency Revolution, the introduction states that the Regency was a time of major events, from the Luddite riots and the War of 1812 to the Battle of Waterloo, the explosion of Mount Tambora and the Peterloo Massacre, and it had a glorious cast, including Jane Austen, Beau Brummel, Lord Byron, John Constable, John Keats, Walter Scott, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, J.M.W. Turner, the Duke of Wellington, and of course the Regent himself. It really was just such a rich period, and it only lasted, say, 10 years before he actually became king. And reading that book just brought it all to life, really, for me. And it just made me realise that even though it's 200 years ago, it's still quite similar to the world we live in. There's still a lot of those elements in the modern world. There's a lot more different ones now, of course, but you look at the costumes and it seems a million miles away, but you take the dress away and the kind of things that were going on in London at the time and in this country at the time are very similar to the entertainments and the world that we live in now. Just we're not so obsessed with cravats and velvet jackets. Well, some of us aren't.
Okay, my eyes focus. I've probably done another three or so hours retouching there. I've tried to show as much as I can. Again, I've just been solidifying areas, so I've done a little bit on the background here, some in the sky. So just choosing those tones and just kind of little dots in there and just making it more solid. Anything that looks like it's been over cleaned in the past, I've just kind of touched those in now. You saw me fill his cravat in, so that's been repaired and looks a lot better now. I'm going to let that dry now. That's going to take a while to dry, and then I will assess what it looks like once it's dry. But I'm happy with how he's looking. I think he looks really good. Once dry, I'll be putting another coat of varnish on and then seeing if there's any more final adjustments that need to be made. But other than that, I'm going to leave him for a little while. He looks great. I'm so pleased with him. I do really, really, really enjoy retouching. I mentioned in some of my comments that how I learnt to paint was by copying old master painting. So I try and copy a Vermeer or a Caravaggio, and invariably they weren't fantastic, but it taught me how to match colours and how to use my palette and which tones blended with the witch tones to get certain colours, so it really stood me in good stead. So I do really enjoy the retouching process. I have been minimal with him though. I have only just tried to put in little bits and bobs just to bring him back to life, but you can see he's taking shape. So we will let him dry now, and then next thing you will see, we'll be putting another varnish layer on top of him. So right, I will be back soon.
Just in case you forgot how he arrived, I love seeing this picture, and then I love seeing how he looks now too.